Okay, and we're live and we're recording. And this is my nervous part while I wait for the room to fill up. So that'll, that'll take a second. And while we're waiting for that, I just want to talk about really cool things. So Doris, just to be really clear, I do want to talk about the fireplace behind you, which means that you must be one of those people, like when I watch MSNBC, there are some people who have really cool offices. Like, are you in the coolest office in your house? Is that what that is?
Well, I'm in a room in my house that has kind of become my de facto office in the pandemic. It's really like my kitchen dining room area, and it does have a lovely fireplace. It's in the South End, an old part of Boston. It is a non-functional fireplace, which was bad for me when I moved in. But these days they don't let us use the fireplaces unless you have them modified. So, right, safety reasons.
Got it. Well, it's just so beautiful. It's just, it's like so not fair. I just want you to know that there are fans here. So hi everyone. If you are here to watch Doris Iarovici, yes, I got it right. Yes. And Virginia Pye have a lovely conversation about Doris's brand new collection, -1. I'm gonna, did it focus? It's going to focus. Then we were going to get started in just a second. I just want to make sure that all of our friends can make it. So I'm just going to ask one more just like friendly banter question before we get started. And that's to you, Virginia. I just love all things totes. So I mean, I'm just going to sport the silver unicorn here. And I noticed that you have beautiful tote bags behind you.
I have functional bags behind me. Yeah, no, you're very good. You're very good how you work that in there. I actually, thank you for asking. One of those bags actually was made by my publisher when my first novel came out. And that is like one of these very sweet things that probably nobody else still has it, 2013. But anyway, it makes me happy to have it there and to use it sometimes, even though it's pretty beat up at this point. So.
But I hope people notice it and they're like, so this book, like, where can I get this book?
You're supposed to put it over your shoulder and like walk through the grocery store and have people jump out and say, what is that interesting cover of a book?
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love that. I wish I had a tote bag.
I know, we need to get you a tote bag.
You got to get you a tote bag, like just a beautiful tote bag, especially because the cover of -1 is so beautiful. Like, I feel like it would make a gorgeous tote bag. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And I will say the cover is actually by a Massachusetts-based artist named Leah Diak, who's a very talented photographer and multimedia artist. So she, I was lucky enough to have her provide the artwork for the cover, and then the press designed it.
That is so cool. That's so cool. I love that. I love that. That's awesome. Okay, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I'm going to just get things started here. So, hello. My name is Kira Wilson-Cook. I am the events coordinator for the Silver Unicorn Bookstore in Acton, Massachusetts. I'm delighted to be here today with Doris Iarovici. I got it right that third time. I'm gonna get it. It's gonna get smoother as I go. Author of the brand new beautiful collection -1, and she is here with her friend Virginia Pye, who is the author of the beautiful book Shelf Life of Happiness, which is your latest collection. I'm just so delighted to have these in my hand. I've done some sneak peeks of both of them. I haven't been able to do the cover to cover thing, but I'm just like delighted to have them. These books are available to you right now at the Silver Unicorn Bookstore if you're local. If you're not local, you can find them at silverunicornbooks.com or an independent bookstore near you. I would like to encourage you, if you have questions for both of these authors, throw them into the Q&A. Virginia will be weaving your questions into this conversation. So don't wait till the end. If you have a question, put it in the Q&A, not in the chat, put it in the Q&A. And I think that's it. The hour is yours. I'll pop in at the end and feel really sad to break up what I know is going to be a really awesome conversation. Doris, congratulations on the release of your new collection. It's beautiful. Thank you so much for choosing the Silver Unicorn to talk about your new book. I just know that this is going to be a delight.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kira.
Absolutely. All right, I'm disappearing now.
Okay, stick around though. Come back, I mean, of course. Doris, I'm so happy to get to talk to you. And let me just adjust it so we've got, there we go. Hang on, there you go, my dear. Just getting settled. So your collection, -1, is beautiful, as Kira described it. And we're just going to dive in and sort of talk about the stories in particular and about short stories in general and about you as a writer. And so one of the things that I loved about the book was just how vivid the characters are. And it really is very character-based short stories. And these are characters who are very real. And part of what's real about them is that they face sort of painful situations or have losses in their lives or complex relationships with other characters. So I'm thinking of, in one, there's a grown daughter who is trying so hard to be connected with her father, but has such disappointment about that, and also about how her father deals with his mother, her grandmother, and the father instead seems much more interested in his new wife and the stepsister. So you have this complex family of sort of people wanting each other and not being able to have each other. Or in another story, you have a stepmother who tries so hard to connect with and be of use to her stepsons, and is rebuffed and finds that to be a big challenge. And another husband who was sort of dominated or bullied in a way by his mother ends up with a second wife who also treats him that way. And yet we see how tender he is with his own son and tries to not pass that on. It's really these families that are filled with complex relationships that really get at human nature and what is our biggest challenges are. So I'm just wondering, what drives you to write about these intimate relationships that are sometimes healing and sometimes hurtful, really?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think in part, I'm always driven to write by things that interest me or things that perplex me or puzzle me, maybe. So I think that these stories arose out of a combination of, certain moments in my own life. I had suffered the loss of my husband some years before I started writing these stories, and was kind of shying away from writing about death because it seemed very sad. And then, enough time had gone by, and I knew enough other people who had similar losses or reconfigurations of their intimate circle. And so I was thinking about that quite frequently. And the stories just sort of started to emerge. And I would say, in general, the fiction that I like to read tends to be full of complex psychological tensions. And, then my day job also, I think, figures into that. So my work as a psychiatrist, sometimes helps me see these complexities in a slightly different way. And sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it's, you're kind of swept up in a situation, or, I might hear about a particularly painful moment in someone's life, and it sets me off on my own kind of quest to understand sort of what's going on, or to try to make sense of it for myself. And I think that was at play as I was writing some of these stories.
Right. Right. Well, that's a good introduction. I have so many different questions I want to ask you about just different things that you just touched on, but it occurs to me, would you like to read to also start us off?
Sure. Yep. And I have, I'm going to read from actually the story that's the last story in the collection, although of the group of stories, it's the first one that I wrote. So it's the oldest story. And what I'm going to do is actually read 3 short sections that add up to just under 10 minutes.
That's fine. That's great. So, and we will get back to these questions. You just laid out some really interesting, first thoughts. It'll be good to circle back to. Yeah.
Great. So I hope it'll make sense. I'm going to skip ahead a couple of times. But this is a short story that was published in the literary magazine called Limestone a few years back. And it's about some of what we're talking about, complex relationships and maybe new beginnings is another piece of this particular one. And okay, so I'll go ahead and start reading.
Yeah.
Jump. Driving back from Greensboro, the 10-foot vaulting pole strapped to the roof of her car, Ellie Winters thinks, I did not imagine this would be my life. This thought pops up more and more these days. Beside her, Mickey is singing along to a hip-hop song on the radio, feet propped against the glove compartment, gold curls fluttering in the breeze. You can go more than 20 miles an hour, Mom, Mickey says. I'm doing 55. The speed limit is 65. It won't hurt the pole. I'm not worried about the pole. My driver's ed teacher says going too slow is as dangerous as going too fast. Ellie's heart shimmies. Michael used to say those very words. I don't know how you talked me into letting you take driver's ed when you still have 2 weeks before turning 15. She flicks her eyes to Mickey and catches the rosy flush of triumph on her daughter's pale cheek. And while we're on the subject of perplexing topics, what the heck was I thinking when I agreed to let you jump? I had no idea the pole is so long. What she really means to say is, I had no idea you'd catapult so high into the sky and then sail back with nothing but a flimsy mattress to catch you. She never says exactly what she means anymore. Mickey lifts her left shoulder, but then leans toward Ellie, and with lips like moth wings, drops a kiss on Ellie's right cheekbone. She resumes singing. The time for discussing whether Ellie would or would not allow pole vaulting was before she signed the permission slip, before she had put another $300 on her credit card. Her own mother, Helen, hadn't made any attempt to mask her disapproval. Michaela is going to do what? But you're not going to let her. She wants to, Ellie had said. Michael wouldn't have wanted her growing up fearful. She's a good athlete. Helen, a linguistics professor at McGill University, had sighed loudly into the phone, and Ellie could picture the pursed lips, the cocked eyebrow. There's more to life than high school sports, and bravery doesn't translate into unnecessary risks, Helen said. Then, I can't imagine Michael would have allowed it. Michael would have encouraged it, Ellie had said, the blood washing into her cheeks. She had signed the permission slip that night. Now, watching the yellow hazard flags flutter on the ends of the pole, she's not sure that's true. She unloads her daughter and the pole near the grassy high school field, and 2 lanky boys jog over to help. The taller one, who Mickey introduces as Jed, bumps Mickey's shoulder playfully as he hoists the pole onto his shoulder, and Ellie pauses at the look that boomerangs between boy and girl, the smile that blooms on her daughter's face. Has Mickey mentioned Jed before? She waits to catch Mickey's eye, but the teenagers turn away. Mickey tosses a casual goodbye over her shoulder. Ellie tries to hold on to the glow of her daughter's happiness, to use it to push away the fear bubbling around the edges of her heart. She doesn't stay for practice. She needs the 2 hours anyway to catch up on laundry and groceries. She keeps her head down in the produce aisle at the Harris Teeter, but before long hears her name. As soon as she sees her friend Cecilia beaming in her direction, she knows she won't make it through her to-do list. Cecilia's eyes widen as she exclaims, I was literally about to call you, and she presses Ellie close. Ever since Mickey stopped soccer, I never see you. Let's grab a cup of coffee, my treat. Cecilia ushers her toward the Starbucks behind the floral department, and before Ellie can say anything else, they're bumping knees at a small round table, 2 lattes between them, their half-full carts parked at the store's threshold. It's unusual, even for Cecilia, to drop shopping in the middle of a Saturday just to talk. Like most of the women she knows, Ellie's entire social life is shoehorned into the hours in the bleachers during Mickey's various games, or the occasional cell phone conversation while in line at the checkout. How I'd look down on women like this when Michael and I were graduate students, she thinks. Women like me. Once Cecilia has chronicled her daughter's recent soccer achievements and repeated how all the girls miss Mickey, she gulps down half her coffee and leans forward. So, I've been wondering, are you seeing anyone? Ellie's shoulders creep toward her ears. If you could imagine how busy I've just listened for a minute, Cecilia taps both palms on the table. Please. Ellie lifts an eyebrow, which the other woman interprets as permission to proceed. So, our new goalie on the soccer team, sweet little girl from California. Turns out her daddy is a widower. Wife died a year ago, aneurysm. He moved here to be closer to his family, so I thought. She drops her eyes and sips her latte. Heat lashes through Ellie's chest. She watches her friend wait and sighs. You thought since we'd each lost a spouse, maybe we'd be a good match, she says. So I'm gonna skip ahead from this scene to the scene where Ellie agrees to go on a date with this gentleman whose name is Malcolm. So how long was it before you went on a date after? Malcolm asks this on the heels of an effortless conversation about teenage daughters and driver permits, just as she had relaxed into noticing his fresh scrubbed scent and the warmth radiating from his square hand. Now a tremor cuts through her. She tips up her wine glass, heat feathering into her cheeks. She would lie, but something about the way he leans toward her in his poorly ironed, button-down Oxford with the diagonal crease across the chest instead extracts from her the truth. 15 years. He blinks. His mustache twitches. I thought you said, I'd understood your husband died 15 years ago. She lifts her eyes to his and nods once. He colors. He runs his hand over his mouth. I'm not advocating anyone wait that long, believe me, she blurts out, drowning out his quiet, so this is your first. She continues, if you'd asked me 15 years ago, I wouldn't have believed it myself. It just, one year kind of became the next. No need to mention the awkward setups, the way the occasional single man would materialize at a friend's dinner party, leaving her confused and tongue-tied. No need for him to know that she had worn her wedding band until last year. She'd married Michael because she loved him and needed time to decide on her future before being forced to return to Canada. But once married, it felt like all she had ever wanted was to be with him. When that was no longer possible, there was Mickey, and Mickey needed holding and breast milk and gentle fingers brushing her forehead. Mickey needed upbeat games and doctor checkups and someone to pay the bills. I'm glad you came out tonight, he says. She nods. Malcolm has a creased face and a sprinkling of white in his chestnut hair, but he's just a few years older than she. Men her age look so much older than they used to. And then the third section is a couple of weeks after, so the first time that she actually goes to have dinner with Malcolm at his house. Malcolm's house in a brand new development in Cary is flanked on either side by empty lots. Small red flags outline the foundations of his future neighbors. Straw covers the hard red clay of his front yard, protecting the dusting of grass seed. Pebbles wedge into her sandals as she totters across the gravel path. He opens the door before she rings the bell, and they both giggle. Sorry about all this, he says, sweeping a hand past the unpacked cardboard boxes pushed against the walls of the living room. Lara was the one with the decorator's touch. I just haven't, but I've got the kids' rooms all set, and that's what counts, right? She takes in the sofa, TV, the soccer ball wedged under the coffee table, the one framed painting of a log cabin in the snow. She feels as if she's missed a step and sucks in a breath. She thrusts forward the wine bottle she almost forgot she was holding. Oh, let's open this right away, he says. It smells good in here. She trails him to the kitchen. Takeout Italian, he says. I'm really good at takeout. They drink the wine standing beside the kitchen counter while their dinner spins in the microwave and she feels shy. She says, you know, I've never been both mother and wife at the same time. He cocks his head. She tucks her hair behind his ear. I mean, I never thought I'd have to be a single mom. It wasn't what I signed up for, you know. I mean, seems like I was just telling my daughter the facts of life, telling her to wait and then to use protection if she's gonna, and she stops abruptly, face burning, and drains her wine. Malcolm grins. He touches her shoulder and she takes a step toward him, and then his fingertips are releasing sparks as he brushes her neck, her throat. He runs his hands across her breasts and down her hips, and the house disappears. She follows him down another hall and skirts the boxes in his bedroom while he lights candles and fumbles to dim the overhead lights. She kisses him, thinking, I remember this, thinking, it's so good to feel wanted. She had begun to fear that part of her had died with Michael, but no. When her skirt drops away between breaths, she says, you do have a condom or something, right? And he groans and pushes away from her to rummage in his nightstand drawer, then disappears to the bathroom. When he returns, fiddling with the foil packet, his eyes are hooded and a chill passes through Ellie's body. I'm sorry, it's just, this is new for me and I don't know you well, and I'm trying to do it right. There's been no one but Lara for years, he mumbles, and we were both clean, if that's what you're worried about. Then he curses, and suddenly he's hanging his head, sighing, and she realizes his erection is gone. I'm sorry, she repeats. He's turned away from her, and she puts her hand against his shoulder blade and squeezes. It doesn't matter. Maybe it's too soon. His eyes flash when he turns back toward her. It's not too damn soon for me. Is it too soon for you? He snaps, then squeezes shut his eyes and apologizes. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Wow, that's a great selection that you picked. Oh, it's so moving. And I just feel for her so much that she's, that's such a painful moment at the end. I'm just feeling.
I read a little bit beyond that, but.
Yeah, no, I love that.
I'll stop there.
I know the story does go on from there. So for you all who haven't read the collection, you're going to want to read all the way through that story, for sure. Yeah, it's so moving to start out a story right there at the very beginning where we know that there's been the loss of a spouse and the loss of a parent, in that case to Mickey. And that, you know, your stories in a number of them have explore what it is to be a widow and widowhood. And it's just a very, it's just a very direct way of dealing with grief through these stories. And I just find that so moving. And, you know, how did you, I mean, you mentioned already that you lost your husband. And so did it take you a while to come to this subject? And did you write about other things and then come around to it? Or was this really a necessary part of your process of grieving yourself?
So I would say, I think I said I was avoiding the subject for a number of years. I was determined not to write about it. In fact, I think, you know, writing kind of transmutes an experience too. It changes it. So, and I still feel pretty protective about, you know, kind of my husband and not wanting to write about him per se. So I was trying to avoid that and writing, and I have been working on other projects, and then the stories started coming up. This one was the first, and you know, at the time that I wrote it, I had a number of friends who actually were also widowed, unfortunately, and some who'd been widowed before me, and then some who lost spouses after. And in fact, when this story came out, I had a friend say, this was modeled on me, wasn't it? And I was like, it really wasn't. And it wasn't. I mean, at the time that I wrote it, then I picked 15 years kind of out of a hat because it seemed to me like the longest number of years that I could imagine at that point in my life. But it was a friend had told me that it had been a very long time for her before she felt like ready to date again. And so I would say I was thinking about all these things. And then also, I think just maybe more everyday concerns that we all have as parents, as our own children start to hit adolescence, and you're starting to think about what life is going to be like for them, and sort of juxtaposing the experience of, you know, in some families, the timeline gets scrambled. And so I became really interested in that, right? Like when I got married, had kids, you think it's going to go in a certain order, right? Like you're going to have a partner and have kids and raise the kids with your partner. And then for many people, that's not how it happens. For some people, there isn't a partner at the beginning. I did actually come to know, unfortunately, more than one person who lost a spouse just during the time of pregnancy or shortly after. So, you know, so there's a family that starts out missing a parent right from the beginning. And then in other families, a parent sort of disappears along the way for many reasons, you know, not just death. Sometimes it's divorce. Sometimes it's, you know, I've also known families where parents live apart for various reasons. They're still married, but they may live in different cities, or a parent who travels for work. So they're absent quite a bit. So just kind of, I think all those things were interesting to me. How do any of us manage, right? How do we juggle all these different roles? And how do we manage when life doesn't go according to the plan? Which, as we know, life never goes according to the plan. This year in particular, I think, has underscored that for all of us. So what do we do then? And how do we, different people cope?
Yeah. Wow. Well, you touched on a lot of other things I want to follow up about the divorce and the different shapes that families take, and also geographically how families in your stories are in different locations. But I also just want to go back to the what you read and Mickey, the teenage character. And I just love the metaphor or of her being a pole vaulter. And there is hope and resilience in these stories too. We're focusing on sort of the loss and the way they go directly right at the heart of grief and of loss, but there's also hope and resilience. And I think that the Mickey character really embodies that. And her, the mention of her flying through the air and landing on a thin mattress, well, that's what we all do, and that's what hope is. And it's just very, I found that also very moving. So do you like to think about the stories in that way too, as sort of a way to resolve them in a more, it's beyond up, it's not upbeat as in a light way. It's just very profound, I think. Yeah.
I think I'm also interested in kind of the duality of, grief and hope, and that, we're all living through moments that have pain in them, and also possibility and joy. And so I think for my own kind of sanity, when I write about topics that are more difficult, I do look for like the little, the seed of hope and joy. And I think it's probably a way that I try to get through difficult moments in my life too, right? That try to shift my attention to encompass maybe more than just what it might be focused on in that moment. So yeah, and I had to do a lot of research about pole vaulting for this story. Nice. But I was kind of inspired by seeing a family at my kid's school at the time who had one of these poles strapped to the car. And if you've ever seen one, it's amazing. They're really, really long. And you think, how are you going to drive with that? So I ended up talking to the parents and like learning about how you transport the pole in pole vaulting, and then
well, that's a great segue to the fact that a lot of the parents in these stories are juggling so many different things, and they go to great lengths for their children. They're trying to, in many cases, they're doctors and they're working long shifts, and they're trying to be parents, and they're also dealing with marriages that sometimes are falling apart, or divorce is in a number of these stories. And I just think that it's a very realistic portrayal. You have very realistic portrayals of what it's like to be a parent today. And it made me wonder if this is from your own experience, or also as a psychiatrist, sort of what you get to see or hear from the people who you see, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, these are kind of foundational relationships, right, for all of us. So the relationships within families, I think my work as a psychiatrist certainly informs my fiction, and also just my perspective. So I do think that we're shaped by the experiences that we have early in life, and obviously I also believe that the way that they interact with our genetic, our biological kind of structure, right? So, but yeah, absolutely. How do experiences that we've had really early on, then maybe if we're unaware of it, continue to shape experiences we have later, right? So the story that you mentioned about the surgeon, with the, difficult and some might say abusive mother. I think it's quite common, and I've sort of seen in my experience working with patients that the children who've suffered some sort of abuse or neglect, you might think that they would choose partners who are the opposite of that, but often they choose partners who replicate the experience that they had when they were young. And, that's sort of heartbreaking and also, I guess, something that I think once we become aware of, we're more able to change. So I think that
I think that's such a tender story, though, because he's trying, the father in that story, who's the one we're speaking of, who had both a difficult mother and a difficult second wife, he's trying very hard to be a good dad. I mean, he's keeping track of his son, and he's wanting his son to have a good time and just enjoy things, and not have a life that's hard and where he's being treated unfairly. So I thought that was very touching.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think that's true too. That again, sort of being aware of those forces for any of us, and to the extent that we can be, because it's very hard to know your own blind spots, right? So, but the more that we can be aware of those forces, the more we can move toward doing things differently. But I think without some awareness, it's very hard, even though, I believe that basically all parents want to do the best they can for their kids. And yet in some families, things go awry, and why is that? How does that happen?
Right.
And also, like, I think in this collection, I became very interested in the diversity of experiences in families that have suffered loss. So I think that there's also like this idea that all loss is the same, or that all grieving is the same. And I think it's very, very different. And that's part of what I was trying to accomplish with writing stories that have certain similarities, but I'd like to think that they're kind of like riffing on a theme.
Yeah, yeah, they are. And yet each story is really very unique. And so it's almost like the theme of a lost family member, or something that's been a loss, whether through divorce or death, or some kind of seismic change within a family. It's almost like it creeps up on the reader. I know it's going to be there because I figured out that that's what the theme of the book is. But what's so lovely is that each story is just very organically told. So it just happens to be a family where, oh, well, oops, this is happening in a different way here. It's not, there's nothing where these stories are replicating each other exactly. So, but I thought I loved the very first story. I thought it was very powerful, and I think it's particularly because it's the story of a stepmother who is a therapist, and clearly is very knowledgeable about, or has helped people and worked with people who've had trauma in their families and have had great difficulties. And then it actually turns out that she, we learn very quickly that she's lost her stepson to suicide. And so it really made me wonder about, what how do you, as a writer and as someone who is giving people the kind of help that they need, how do you blend these different worlds? And that story in particular, makes me want to ask that question.
Yeah. So in that story, and I think that in that story, it's sort of left up to the reader to decide exactly what happened to the stepson. And in that story, I was actually trying to write about addiction, and in part because I was certainly encountering it in my professional life, and we all have heard about the opioid crisis, and then it was also obviously affecting people in my social circles, not anyone in my family, thank goodness, but there was kind of this fear because, families that were very much like mine did suffer losses of young adults or teenagers, and it was terrifying to me, and also very I felt like I wanted to do something to kind of draw attention to the issue. So I would say that that was a hard story to write because it was, it's about a psychiatrist, so it felt very, and I wrote it in second person, which was a deliberate choice. So second person, it's kind of like, I wanted the reader to also feel like they were the psychiatrist, the narrator. And it's also in some ways a distancing technique, right? Because it's a little bit more distant than saying I, first person. So I was thinking about all those things as I was writing that story. But I would say that it's probably the story that most brings together kind of like my professional understanding, and then also just my personal reactions, as a mother, as a, just kind of picturing what it would be like. I basically at that point had a colleague who lost a child, and, and it was kind of like, you do think everyone looks at you and thinks like, well, if you're a professional in this field, you must know how to prevent this happening. And, people are human, right? So things happen and it's not always preventable. And that is disturbing, obviously, for all of us.
Right.
But I would say I used both my professional knowledge and then my own kind of just experiences as a person in the world, and especially a mother.
Absolutely.
Imagining how that would be.
Oh, it's so painful. And yeah, you'd have actually a number of doctors in your stories, that psychiatrist, and then at least 2 surgeons, if I'm remembering right. And I can't remember if there were others as well, but it did make me particularly notice how hardworking they are, how overworked they are, how many hours, how incredibly hard it is to juggle that kind of high pressure job that requires that many hours, and also that kind of level of responsibility, and their families and their marriages. And in a number of cases, the marriages are the thing that falls apart. And so it just made me wonder about, if that's something that you've seen a lot in your profession, or if this is sort of it could be that it's parents of any sort. It just happens to be that they're doctors. And I don't know, it felt like an inside look at what that world is like.
Yeah, so I mean, I think they're doctors in part because I know so many doctors. So it's my world, that I feel comfortable kind of writing about.
Yeah.
I would say it's probably similar for any profession that is time intensive, right? And so I think it's similar for folks working in business careers and in the legal profession, and academics work long hours too. They do have summer breaks in a way that other professionals don't, which I think is great. So the long hours for sure. And I think I also, I was trying to write about women who are doctors or other professionals, in part because I feel like literature sometimes stratifies women. So it's like, you're either a professional or you're a parent. And I do think in the world as it is today, there are a lot more women trying to do all of the things that traditionally men did, or maybe more because traditionally men had the careers and women were doing the child rearing. Right. So now I actually think it's harder for everyone because everyone's doing everything or trying to, and feeling like they're not doing,
Right.
enough of something. Right. But I think that at the same time, well, I won't go that's a whole other discussion, but certainly I think that our society could be set up to support parents better than it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it did make me wonder how you managed to have had time, since you portray the world of these people so well, like how on earth have you had time to now also throw into the mix writing, in addition to demanding professional career and being a mother.
So in some ways, I feel like I was very lucky because in psychiatry, there is the flexibility to work part-time, which I think in some fields in medicine would be much harder. So I have worked part-time for many years now, and I, made a conscious choice to do that, soon after my second child was born, because I realized there was no way I was going to be able to do everything that I was trying to do. I think for a while it was sort of the privilege of being in a dual income family, and then, when I lost my spouse, it was a little bit harder, but obviously not everyone can work part-time, but that's what has allowed me to write in the way that I do. So like half of my professional time is set aside for writing. And then because I've worked in university settings pretty much my entire career. And so I also managed to work out a contract where I had some time off in the summers, which again is very unusual, I think, in medicine. And I used that time to do writing residencies, which were kind of godsend.
I want to ask you about that. Yeah. So how is that?
You and I have been to one of the same.
Yeah, we've both been to the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. Not at the same time, I don't
Not at the same time.
think. But yeah, I've went a number of times, and you've been to other ones as well.
Yeah. So I think that, but having the dedicated time for writing is critical. I think writers do it in different ways. I'm sure that you have your own ways that you have found to carve out time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Somehow you make it happen. And so how long did it take you to write this collection? What's the span of these stories?
Yeah, I think that the one that I read from, which is the oldest, I probably drafted something like 8 or 9 years ago, and then kind of reworked it over some time. But then the newest stories I wrote actually at a residency when I was taking a break from a longer project that I am still working on. And so they're very new. They were like the year right before the pandemic hit. And so probably over 8 or 9 years, so a long time. And I wasn't writing with the intention to write a collection of short stories. I was writing stories kind of in between, when I would get stuck or just bored of my other project. And, I love short stories. They're kind of I love reading them as well as writing them. But, as you know, the agents out there tend to say, don't write short stories because no one buys collections and they're harder to market. And so I wasn't like aiming to write a short story collection. And then at some point, I had published a few in literary magazines, and I kind of looked at what I had and I was like, oh, there's almost enough for a collection.
Mm-hmm.
And then they kind of, made their way into the world.
Actually, it occurs to me that it's kind of similar for each of us, because I wrote my the stories in my collection actually over like 20 years, because I really was writing novels mostly, but then I would write these stories and I'd send them out and I'd forget about them, and then I'd write another one later and all that. And then it wasn't until much later that I realized they had a common theme. And in my case, it's happiness, or the pursuit of, or the disappointment in, or, things around that, what sort of going after ostensibly what we want and the difficult path to that. And in your case, it sounds like a theme emerged over time. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. I think it speaks to maybe the unconscious trying to work something out, and
yeah. And you can do that in a short story because it's you can work on a nugget of an idea and zero in on it's more anecdote as opposed to a big structure that you have to build, where you can throw ideas into it, but it's not necessarily one thing you're pursuing. I think anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved, there was actually, I think it was in the tweet from Silver Unicorn Books actually today, about short fiction being easier on the reader and harder on the writer.
Yes,
So
that's great.
I loved that. So I was like, yeah, there's actually some truth to that.
Yes. Yeah. So just out of curiosity,
bonbons when you eat them.
Yeah, they feel like they're bonbons to them. I mean, if they can seem like that, then we've done something right. So how many drafts do you think these stories, like, what's the most number of drafts one of these stories went
That's a good question.
through? Or over how many years did you write a story? Because I've known
Yeah.
stories in here in my collection that I did over, would revise over 5-year period, whatever, off and on, returning to it.
Yeah, I would say there's probably a story in here that I revised many times over probably 4 or 5 years. And then there's one story that I revised a bunch of times when I wrote it. And then when the collection was accepted, the editor, we were talking about point of view and kind of the different point of views in the collection. And he was like, well, the only thing you're missing is first person. And, it's ironic because I was actually working on a memoir, which I'm still working on, which is all first person. I was like, well, maybe I was just not in the mood for first person here. But it got me thinking, like, could I rewrite one of the stories in first person? And so I ended up rewriting, the story in the collection called Afterlife, which was originally written in third person. And it's, as if you've ever tried to do this, but once you change the point of view, it's like a lot changes in addition. So I basically had to rewrite the whole story, and not just like substituting, like going through with the find and replace function. A lot shifts in the story. And actually I liked the story much better when I went to first person. It became, I thought, livelier and kind of more exciting. And my editor seemed to like it better too. So we left it in that form for the collection. So I've never done that before, because that story was also one of the older stories. And, so I hadn't really picked it up in a number of years, and then spent, did a few versions with the point of view shift, a few additional revisions. And then there are 2 stories that were not revised almost at all, because they were written right before the collection was accepted. And then when it was accepted, there was another story in there that I just didn't like anymore. And so I asked the editor if I could kind of swap out these stories. And so the newer stories really, I think I had revised maybe like a handful of times before they went into the collection. So kind of the whole gamut.
I know, it's like children. It's like each requires its own thing, whatever. So by the way, for our audience, please send us questions in the Q&A if you think of anything you want to ask Doris or me. But there's still so much more to chat about. And among other things, I'm curious about this, just to kind of go back to the where we get our inspiration from, where you get your inspiration from. And we sort of touched on how you hear that, or I'm guessing that you hear stories, you were saying, from, people who you just know, but also through your profession. And I'm wondering if that's ever an issue. Like, are you ever tempted to, use a client's story, but you don't want to because of, patient
Right.
privilege, or client patient, or what is it called?
Confidentiality. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, like some of the themes that I was talking about before that I avoided when I became a I was a writer before I was a psychiatrist. So, I'd always been writing like my whole life. But when I became a psychiatrist, I very intentionally avoided any stories that had any mental health topics, and then anything that could even seem like it came from a patient experience, because I really didn't, I take the confidentiality piece seriously, and I didn't want to make anyone feel like I was writing their kind of therapy story. But now I've been working for so many years, and I've heard so many stories, and in fact there are more similarities than differences, I would say. So again, I think that at a certain point it becomes much easier to write, because it's no longer about like one person's singular experience, but there may be like a sentence that I heard in a session, or a little difficult moment that someone might have shared with me that might set off thinking about a story idea.
Right.
So
that's also just with age. You have more, literally have more things to process and to share and to reflect back on, I'm guessing.
Yeah. And I think you know, and then, but it's definitely something that's tricky, and I think it's more tricky if you're writing nonfiction, which I also write. You know, so essays, and I've written essays that are based on patient experiences, and I think that, you know, nowadays I'm more, you know, like my most recent essay that I wrote that was based on a patient experience that was ended up being in the New York Times. I actually asked the patient's permission. So again, didn't divulge any personal information, but the New York Times does ask that you use real details, so you can't change like age or gender or, you know, anything that you say has to actually be factual, even if it's not, you know, you're obviously not sharing the person's name or anything like that. But even so, there's enough now that I feel like in, you know, in nonfiction, I'm asking people's direct permission. And
interesting. I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
Very cool. That's very cool.
Or making it up. So, you know, when I've written about psychiatry in other settings, I make up case vignettes and then, you know, clearly say these are made up or composite vignettes so that people's confidentiality is protected.
So you were a young writer and then you went to medical school? Is that how that worked?
Right. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a big decision. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so I grew up I'm an immigrant myself, and I grew up in an immigrant family. And so like the idea of being a writer wasn't really on the career list. It was kind of like, yeah, you could do that in addition to something else that's like an actual career. Yeah. So, you know, I was much older before I realized that there are people who do make their living as a writer. But it's, you know, obviously it's very difficult to do that. Even now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe especially now.
Maybe more so than ever. Yes, yes. Well, that is pretty amazing. It's not many people can have sort of both sides of their brains working quite like that, I think. So that's great to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And well, Kira, do you have any questions for us? I think you might.
I've been sitting here just looking at the Virginia the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, which I'd never heard of before. So now I'm just like dreaming beautiful dreams of fellowships.
It's a really lovely place. Really lovely place. In the springtime, they have beautiful bluebirds there. Just
yeah, it is. I invite anybody who's here who's a writer to look at this. You know, and here I thought McDowell was the only place where somebody can find some peace and quiet to do some writing, and I have been misinformed, clearly.
Yeah, no, there are others. There are others too. We'll talk.
Yeah,
yeah. Whoever, yeah, happy to share.
That's phenomenal. You know, this has been such an amazing discussion, and I just can't believe that it's coming to an end. I want to ask you both about your future projects before I ask any other personal questions. You know, I think that you both have these collections. And I'm assuming that there's more. And so, you know, what does that mean for your future? When do we get to look forward to more work from y'all?
You want to go first or second, Doris? Your call.
You can go first. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I just finished a novel that I worked on for about 4 years, and my agent is currently trying to sell it. And she's just sort of gone out with it very recently. And I'm excited. It's called The Book Lovers. And it's about a woman dime novelist, meaning she writes romance and adventure novels. It's in the 1890s here in Boston. And she sues her publisher for underpaying her as a woman. And it has romance, since she's a romance writer, but not the romance you would think. So it's a very fun novel, and I'm hopeful for it. I hope. Everybody cross your fingers. So
yes.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
It was a lot of fun to write. It was really fun to research the literary scene, 1890s literary scene in Boston, and then to just play with it and have a really good time, and to play with romance tropes and other things that has to do with both writing and publishing. And my favorite scenes in the book actually take place in a bookstore. So it's that whole world that we love.
I'm ready to read it, Virginia.
Yeah, really, that's phenomenal. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I've been working on a novel on and off for a number of years now. And I've started revising it yet again this past year. But in the off time, I had started a memoir, which was like my main project when the pandemic hit. And then I'm just going to have to rewrite big portions of it because of the pandemic, because of the pandemic changes a lot of the things that I was writing about.
Mhm.
So, there was some interest in the novel earlier this year. So I've had to like gone back into revising with the hopes of, I had an agent that I'm kind of decided to part ways with. And so I'm looking for a new agent. I'm going to start doing that again sometime in the next, couple of months is the plan.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
yeah.
Good.
Big changes for you both. Yeah. I think that my last question really does have to do with that, about this pandemic and what that means for writers and the way that we'll all approach our craft. And I'm really curious to know if that's something that's been part of your, the whisperings of your muse. And this is for the both of you. How is the pandemic? I know that it's kind of stifled the creativity of some people, but as we emerge into this new normal, into this new world, how do you think surviving a pandemic will touch your craft and storytelling?
It's a great question. It's a really great question. I'll just answer. I noticed that for me personally, my writing mattered to me more than ever as a way for me to kind of stay sane and balanced. That when I was involved in writing the book I just described, which as you can tell was very much in a different world than our current one, and a kind of a funner one, and lighter in certain ways, with some similar themes to today, but still a different world. And it was just such a pleasure to get into that world and think about the problems that are there and not the problems that we were having here. And so I really just relished having a project, really. And then when I let the book go, I was like, oh no, I didn't think about that. I shouldn't have let it go, meaning I sent it to my agent and then it was out of my hands. I was like, oh no. And so it was actually quite hard to get on to the next thing or think about what I wanted to do. And so I started reading a lot. I actually read 75 novels in 2020.
Wow.
Wow.
I just read a shitload. And I didn't know what else to do. And then I finally have gotten into writing a new novel that I'm into now and I'm happy about. So, but I think that it showed me how much writing helps me personally process the world and stay balanced in my life, and how important it is to me.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think I probably would have felt a little bit more balanced had I done more writing. So I found it just very, very difficult to write. It's been coming back the last few months for sure. And I wrote, I kind of wrote throughout the pandemic, but much less than I would in a normal year, because I think that I just need things to be a little bit more settled in order to be able to feel the kind of creative impulse. And the writing that I did do tended to be a little bit more nonfiction and essays than the fiction. I mean, part of it was that I was also like working on revisions for this book because the book was coming out, and then all the like
that's distracting. Yeah,
proofreading and copy editing stuff that has to happen as you're getting the book ready for publication. So that took up some of my time, but I think it was really just like emotional energy that I just felt like I lacked.
Yeah.
You must have been giving so much emotional energy to your clients through this period. I know, I mean, what a tough time.
Right.
You're really helping people so actively, I'm sure.
Well, I think it's a weird time because we're all going through this together. And, this isn't original to me, but a trauma therapist said that this is like this weird situation where it's not that you're helping someone through their trauma, their trauma is the same as your trauma. And that is sort of, it's a different way of thinking about the work, so I think it did feel more draining than it, has in other years. And just that, we all felt like we didn't really know the best way. We, you know, to some degree, we figured out a lot of stuff through this year, but some of it is still, you know, we don't know. We're all kind of figuring it out as we go along.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Wow.
Absolutely. Have you been able to write, Kira?
I have. It's been weird. I think that being a mom means that I have to compartmentalize, and so the writing has been a sanity thing. So that's been a blessing, and it's manifested in interesting ways. But I am thinking about how writers from now on, we will be working out our trauma in our written words, and traumatized people now, you know, these multiple generations of who have lived through this traumatic experience together, will be bringing that to the art that we present to them. And what does that mean? What does that mean to the stories that we tell and how we tell them, and what their expectations are for the stories that we tell. You know, that's just what's been on my mind as a writer and a reader, because you know, everything that we read right now is still something that was conceived before this world. But now whatever we create, you know, we'll have to live and manifest in this world to come. And we don't know what those expectations are yet. How strange.
Yeah.
How many opportunities. There are so many opportunities in that. But yet we cannot conceive of them, which is this kind of interesting. But I think that there's something really, there's something really amazing about what you've presented to us is a roadmap, multiple roadmaps, multiple ways of dealing with the trauma of loss, life missing, life longing, life coping, life changing. So I think that there's something really interesting about, you know, the art that currently exists and how it will talk to the world to come. So that's why I think that this collection is just so powerful. And I really do encourage everyone. I know my camera won't make it. I don't know why my camera won't focus on it. I hope that everyone who's here in the audience will take the time to pick up this really beautiful collection, -1. And I hope that you will also pick up Virginia's collection, Shelf Life of Happiness. Both of these are, you know, collections that should be on your shelf. This has been wonderful. I'm so grateful for your time, and for your art and for your energy this evening. This has just been great.
Thank you so much, Kira.
Yeah, and thanks so much, Virginia, for moderating, and Kira, thanks very much to you and to Silver Unicorn. I look forward to being in the store, hopefully sometime soon.
Please come visit us. Please, all of y'all come visit us. And if you can't come see us in the store, please go to silverunicornbooks.com, or visit an independent bookstore near you. We still exist. And we have books like this on the shelf for you. Yeah, stay safe out there, everyone. You know, keep writing. And we look forward to hosting you both again after your next project hits the shelves.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Have a great evening, y'all. Bye.